All right, I have started the recording. Let me pull up my presentation. My name is Buddy McMullen, and today I'll be presenting to you the Eastgate Center in Harare, Zimbabwe, pictured there on the left. And the one-line headline for this is, it's a shopping mall in Africa with no air conditioner. And you might be thinking, how is that even possible? That has to be so hot. Somehow, the architect and engineering firm was able to do it, and I'll tell you how in a few slides. You can see the exterior of the Eastgate Center pictured on the left, and the interior in between the two towers on the right. So a few specifics about the Eastgate Center. Let me get my face over here. It was originally requested by Old Mutual Investment Group back in 1991, and they pondered if you could have a building that existed in South Africa without an air conditioner. I guess it's very expensive to condition houses and buildings in South Africa, and because of the supply chain issues, it's not reliable to be able to get replacement parts. So they set out to try and find someone who could build them a shopping mall with no air conditioner, and they contacted Mick Pearce, who ended up being the head architect for this project. They wanted a 55,000 square meter building with retail space, which at the time made it the largest building in Zimbabwe. It's composed of 7 floors of office space in each of the 2 rectangular towers, and the bottom floor is 2 floors of retail space, like shopping, food courts, and whatnot. The 2 towers are connected with an arched glass like ceiling, and then an open air atrium where human foot traffic is. Each tower has 24 chimneys for a total of 48, giving the building its very distinctive skyline. Construction started in 1992 and finished in 1996. Specific note, only 12% of the building materials were imported. This included the aluminum windows that were needed for specific thermal resistance requirements, and also high-strength titanium alloy cables. But the rest of the materials and almost all of the skilled labor was sourced locally from Zimbabwe and South Africa. Here is the lead architect, Mick Pearce. Born June 2nd. He went to school in London, the School of Architecture, and pretty much knew that he wanted to focus his career on biomimicry and trying to limit the impact of architecture and design on the environment. He always aims to use local materials, local labor, and as traditional technologies as possible, such as windmills, all in an attempt to limit that damage to the environment. He had to leave Zimbabwe in 2000 due to political strife and conflicts, but he was able to take his talents to Australia and designed another very sustainable building called the Council House 2, which is maybe his more well-known project. As I said, biomimicry was his passion, and it was the inspiration for the Eastgate Center and the many forms that it came in. So the first example is termite mounds. And as you can see here on the left and the right are 2 pictures of a termite mound. The one on the right is actually a picture of Mick and his wife at the termite mound that was kind of the inspiration for this entire thing. But basically Mick was watching a BBC series called Life, with narrated and featuring David Attenborough, and saw him climbing inside of the termite mound and saw all sorts of chimneys and ductwork and this advanced ventilation system designed by the termites that was being hailed as the reason why they were able to keep the mound cool despite the arid South African temperatures. The picture in the bottom right shows an average exterior temperature and then the average interior temperature, showing the effectiveness of the termite mounds. Ironically enough, years later, other professionals actually discovered that the secret to termite mounds wasn't necessarily the vents or the chimneys, but more so the porosity of the soil that allowed it to kind of breathe like a lung. And Pearce didn't really pick up on this because he was an architect and not a biologist, but the mound that Pearce had been viewing and studying, the termites farmed fungus, which created all sorts of gases that need to be ventilated or else they would suffocate. So that's what all of the fancy ventilation and chimneys were for. But it actually ended up working out successfully in like an accidental way for Pearce. Here is the examples of that termite mound put into practice at the Eastgate Center. The bottom left picture shows how the cool air is pumped in through from the bottom of the floors, and it helps to naturally push the hot air up and out, and that hot air goes into the shafts that then is transported up through the chimneys, one of 48 chimneys that push the hot air up the top. This works on a couple of natural processes. Hot air wants to rise. Then you also have a stack effect. As the hot air starts to build momentum going up, it pulls more hot air with it. And it also pulls in more outside air, potentially colder air, to replace that hot air for natural ventilation, kind of replacing itself. And then furthermore, the chimneys at the very top are heated and absorb energy from the sun that actually helps accelerate the hot air even out further and faster from the building. As you can see in the diagram on the side, it kind of shows you the setup of the Eastgate Center and the two towers, that shaded atrium in the middle, and then the parking garages. And I'll talk about this a bit more, but you can see on the diagram that there's a couple of places where they had to put fans. The original design was not supposed to have fans. It was supposed to be entirely passively cooled. So it was a concession after construction, once they started doing some testing, that it wasn't meeting the requirements for human thermal comfort, and they needed to put some fans in a few places to help assist the cold air being rotated through the building. The next example of biomimicry is the cactus. And Mike Pearce said, prickly is a good thing. He recognized that cactuses are able to survive in intense heat and direct sunlight, and try to figure out what mechanisms were allowing for that. That the diagram in the bottom right is actually a hand-drawn diagram from Mick Pearce himself, but it shows how the prickly surface of the cactus helps to reflect and refract the light. So not only does it lower the solar absorption from direct sunlight heating, but it also helps to almost reflect some of the radiation that you would get from solar surfaces by having weird, jagged, like non-standard geometric surfaces and angles. It also limits the amount of like direct viewing angle for short wave solar radiation. Another benefit of the cactus design is the expanded surface area. By having so many little ridges and prickly points, there are much more surface area connecting with or contacting air on the outside, for when the air temperature drops down to the 50s at night, it rapidly cools all of the concrete. The exterior of the building can cool from 80 degrees down to 50 degrees in the course of overnight, with no added cooling, just vents or just fans pulling the air in and rotating it through. On the left, you can see how the Eastgate Center is kind of designed with prickly, kind of non-standard, jagged concrete areas with a bunch of air around them to allow for increased cooling. Another biomimicry, and this is more just not anything specific, but just kind of miscellaneous natural processes. But one of the reasons why this design actually ended up working, but they said it was almost an accident, was they didn't realize just how impactful the concrete blocks pictured on the bottom left were going to be. So Mick Pearce says that his team was actually the first in the world to use this tactic, but they employed concrete blocks, as you see pictured, that they called their concrete teeth. And they're designed in such a way to have large surface area that allows for the air that gets dragged over it to either steal some of its cooling and drop off some of its heat, or deposit some of its heat on the way by. Those concrete bricks are located in the hollowed out floor on every floor of the building. And that hollowed out floor area is where the cool air from the outside is vented in. So when the building is hot and needs to be cold, those act as almost ice cubes, pulling hot air from the outside and cooling it down before it goes into the room. As they heat up throughout the day and they do their job cooling the air, they lose their ability to cool the air, but then the air itself actually has the potential to store thermal energy inside of those concrete blocks. So then the air is being cooled, not because that the concrete is cooler than the air, but because the concrete can almost absorb some of the energy as it goes in. And I read online that people are starting to really use this technology in like nuclear power plants and other places. And early math estimates say that an 18-ton concrete block has approximately 200 kilowatt hours of thermal storage capacity, which is a lot. So not only are they ice cubes, but they're also kind of like batteries, which is very interesting because you wouldn't think that of concrete. Another process used that's just very natural is the vegetation you see in picture top right. I'm calling these green dehumidifiers, and their intent is dual purpose, but primarily they're there to help dehumidify the air as it's getting pulled into the building. They've been placed strategically along columns that are near the air intakes on each floor, so as to try and naturally steal some of that humidity from the air right before it goes into the building. This helps cool the air a bit and also prevents the stuffy or like over condensation effect on the inside. Another benefit of this is that due to their size and shape, they provide a little bit of shade in addition to kind of soaking up some of that solar radiation, just because plants love that solar radiation and they love that moisture because they're doing their photosynthesis. And I also think it looks nice because that, unfortunately, for design considerations, the exterior is kind of a very bland tan, white, brown. So having some nice pops of green color, I definitely think improves their overall aesthetic of the exterior. Next, we've got a couple of human-centered designs and some other ways that the building is successful in its goal of being passively cooled and not having an air conditioner unit. The picture on the left shows the interior of the building. The white section is the inside part of one of the towers, and then not pictured, but basically on the other side would be the other tower. So this large open air area is where all of the entrances are to the shopping malls and food court and whatnot. And it was designed this way to have all intended like human foot traffic or eating or talking or aspirating, that'll all happen in this area. And so by having it be very large open air atrium, the air itself does a lot of work in kind of holding the capacity to not let the thermal, the heat that the humans are exuding at these above average rates get absorbed by the building materials. It's estimates that human activity only raises the temperature on a daily basis by 1.5 degrees C, and that is reset every night by the night cooling. Another tactic employed at the Eastgate Center is small, specifically designed thermal windows. Those were the aluminum windows that I said they had to import. They come with accompanying Venetian blinds that help limit heat gain through the windows by refracting some of the light. Not pictured, but on top of the building, they have solar panels on the roof, and those absorb enough energy to provide all of the hot water needs. They just run the water through the solar panel system to get it heated up. Another design consideration was that Harare, Zimbabwe is very near to the equator, meaning that the east and west facing sides experience the most direct sunlight. To mitigate this, the towers were aligned on that axis, so that way the most narrow face of the building is what is going to be perpendicular to that high intensity sunlight, limiting the surface area that will get directly exposed to the high sunlight. As I alluded to earlier, the light natural colors of tan, white, green, and brown help to limit the absorption of the incoming natural light. And they also do a better job of reflecting the natural light that comes in from the skylight. So there's less of a need for electric lights, which, as you can see, there's no electric lights on that inside picture, and it's still relatively lit up. One last consideration is the air intakes don't start until the third floor, and this is to prevent air intake of potentially contaminated, overheated, or toxic air that might exist at the street level. Harare is a very busy downtown area, and comes with that busy, bustling metropolis is a lot of smog and car contaminants in the air, and it's just heated up from the people and the cars itself. So pulling that air from about 10 meters off the ground helps to limit the human exposure to those things. Another neat part of the Eastgate Center is how Mick Pearce decided to try and honor the culture of Zimbabwe. Picture on the left is what's called a tonga, and I showed a couple of versions of it there, but basically it's a handcrafted ornate wood stool that was very popular in Zimbabwe, and it was known worldwide as a trait of the Zimbabwe culture to be able to produce these ornate stools. And they typically feature diagonal lines with like varying sizes and shapes of geometric gaps. And Mick Pearce wanted to pay homage to that. In the design. So in the bottom left, you can see his version of the tonga design in the concrete section on Eastgate. Another cultural significance is what they call a spirit board. Oftentimes when tribes were constructing their villages, they would put like spears and shields and just like thorny kind of, dangerous, sharp objects near the front entrance gate in an attempt to not only ward off those who meant them harm, but the spirits of the spirit world. It became customary in Zimbabwe culture to have some sort of like thorned crown or spirit ward at the entrance of your building. So Mick Pearce followed along, and you can see kind of like a crown of shields or spears and thorns above the main entrance into Eastgate, letting the locals know that they are entering a safe place physically and spiritually. Here we have a slide for the climate in Harare, Zimbabwe. I thought this was important because it helps you let you know what you're dealing with. And I kind of cheated earlier when I said that it was in just Africa with no air conditioning, because Harare is actually located at 4,800 feet above sea level. So because of that, they have a much more temperate climate than you would see throughout a lot of the other places in Africa. So it's realistically only possible in a climate like this that Harare has. If you were trying to do this in a hotter, more arid environment, I don't think it would work. But that graph on the left shows the average daily sunlight hours per month in Harare. And then the graph in the top right shows the average daily temperature throughout the month or throughout the year. And as you can see, it kind of spikes around the 10th month, October, not only in direct sunlight and temperature, and that is when they see their highest temperatures. And unfortunately, that is when they have their hardest time passively cooling the Eastgate Center. The bottom right shows the typical temperatures. It's typically 82 outside during the day and about 57 at night, but it's known to vary wildly, and it's been recorded as times having a difference between day temperature and night temperature of over 60 degrees, which is very desertous and pretty wild. So now for the efficiency and sustainability claims. These are all from the builders, Mick Pearce, the owners themselves, and then I checked it a little bit with my own math and showed some of their math demonstrating it as well. As I said earlier, it was technically a theoretical failure because they had to add the fans in a couple locations, so it's not actually passively cooled, but it's still really close, and it's still a practical success because that it uses way less energy and costs way less to operate than other buildings of standard or typical similar size and in a similar location. They're quoted as saying that it uses 35% less total energy than 6 other conventional buildings with a full HVAC in Harare. and the savings on capital costs with full HVAC was about 10% of the building cost. Also, as I alluded to earlier, with supply chain issues or power grid issues, being reliant on an electric-based HVAC is problematic in the region, whereas Eastgate can continue to operate with acceptable comfort levels, even without the fans, just using the natural convection. They indicated that it does work for all but 2 weeks out of the 52 weeks in the year. There's 2 weeks, as I alluded to in October, where the interior temperatures can easily reach 80 to 82 degrees inside the building. Over the past couple of years, they've been trying to find ways to mitigate that. Mick Pearce was quoted as saying, the trick is to coordinate the weather outside with the controlled internal environment, taking into account lag times. It's like tuning an instrument like an organ in church. And the team not only installed those fans at a few strategic locations, but they're working on ways such as smart Venetian blinds or light sensitive metrics that would kind of put in place some controls to even more efficiently use the coolness while it has it, or get rid of the heat when it doesn't want it. They say that it averages 2 air changes per hour during the day and can be up to 4 air changes at night when the temperature difference from the outside to the inside is much greater and they have the fans on. The forced convection loop can really speed up when the temperature difference is more great. It's said that they saved over $3.5 million during the first 5 years due to not having to cool or dehumidify the air and not having that HVAC system. Here is the buddy math that I was doing. I wanted to see approximately how much power a building of that size would take to just dehumidify the air. So similar to what we did in class, I converted it all to absolute humidity. I had to look up the atmospheric pressure at 4,800 feet elevation, which is about 85,000 pascals. The average yearly relative humidity for Harare, Zimbabwe is about 58%. So I used that for the exterior set point with the average temperature of 82 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Then for the inside, assuming that this was an HVAC controlled building, I was going to do 22 degrees C with 30% relative humidity. After applying a moisture balance on the air, I could determine the amount of water that would be removed per unit time. And that came out to be approximately 2.5 kilograms per second for the whole building. And then converting that into the power, you would find that that is 500,427 kilowatt hours per day, which if you divide that by the square meters, it's about 9.22 kilowatt hours per meter squared, which is in line approximately with what else exists currently. I was comparing it to other buildings, and total energy use for dehumidification and cooling of a similar building was about 13 kilowatt hours per meter squared. And if you recall, it's usually about 2 times more energy intensive to dehumidify air than it is to cool it. So 9.22 compared to about 13, it seems within the same ballpark for me. And then here is the math that Mick Pearce and his team provided, showing the effectiveness of this building and the design. That graph in the top left shows the average daily temperature readings over the course of, I think, 2 weeks in the month of April 1998. And the blue line is the internal air temperature, the red line is the outside air, and the green line is the concrete slab. And that concrete slab, those teeth that I was talking about, you can see how that's always colder than the interior air, and that's what is really helping to bring down that internal air temperature. You can also see from that line graph that despite the wild sine wave fluctuations of the outside air, the interior air temperature of the building is relatively maintained. An interesting note, and to further demonstrate how effective the night cooling is and how reliant the Eastgate Center is on that nighttime cooling and the really cooling night temperatures, the bottom left graph shows just a 24-hour cycle of temperatures taken on September 26, 1996. The big orange line that is furthest to the bottom and highest to the top with the peak and valley is the outside air temperature. The other lines on the graph are showing the internal temperature at 3 different levels within the building. I think they did the 3rd floor, the 6th floor, and the 9th floor. And then also it shows the concrete slab temperature. That's the blue line. And so as you can see, the internal temperature is not really affected by the external temperature. And that's largely because of that night cooling. It was able to completely cool itself overnight. But then they showed another time, October 14th, 1996. That's the graph to the right of it. And the previous night had a really dense cloud cover, which kind of created a greenhouse effect. So the nighttime temperature didn't get a chance to drop down as low as it typically does, which resulted in the entire building not having a full chance to cool off, and those concrete teeth not really turning back into the ice cubes that we were discussing before. So the building stayed at a higher temperature all day and had a lower capacitance to cool itself down from the natural convection. So it shows that it really is reliant on that cold temperatures overnight. And here are the sources that I referenced. I had a lot of fun researching this project. I hope that buildings around the world start to take notice and similarly conduct situations like this. It's saving money for the owner. I think it's way cooler than a standard building, and it definitely leaves room to be improved. So hopefully one of us will be the ones to improve it. Thank you for watching my presentation, and that's all.